this video, we'll talk about respiration and the first stage in respiration, which is glycolysis. So first thing is, what exactly is respiration? Respiration is the release of energy from food in living cells, where food is used as a fuel. Basically, food contains chemical potential energy, and what happens in respiration is that this chemical potential energy is released to produce energy for the body, okay? And the main fuel for most cells is carbohydrates, and it's usually glucose. Some cells can also break down fatty acids, glycerol, and amino acids to gain energy. And fun fact is, brain cells can only use glucose for respiration. So they can't use fatty acids or amino acids, okay? Only glucose. So stages of aerobic respiration, as we said at the start, it's made up of 4 stages. But we'll only talk about the first stage, which is glycolysis, okay? Glycolysis. And yeah, glycolysis takes place in the cytoplasm of cells. The other stages are link and Krebs cycle and oxidative phosphorylation. And these take place in the mitochondria in different places, but we'll talk about it later. So what exactly is glycolysis? Glycolysis is the splitting of glucose. Okay, so how can we get energy by breaking down glucose? First thing is, glucose gains phosphate to form glucose phosphate. But where did this phosphate come from? This phosphate came from ATP. I'm gonna also talk about ATP in more detail in another video. So ATP is made up of 3 phosphate groups. What happens is that it loses 1 phosphate, it becomes 2, which is ADP. So it produces ADP and releases 1 phosphate group and releases energy, okay? This phosphate group that was released will join with glucose to form glucose phosphate. And then next step is glucose phosphate is converted into fructose phosphate. And then the same thing happens again. So what happens between glucose and glucose phosphate happens when we get fructose phosphate to make fructose bisphosphate. As you can see here, bisphosphate means 2 phosphates. Okay, so it gained phosphate. Why? Again, because ATP was broken down into ADP phosphate group and released energy. Okay, and this phosphate was added to fructose phosphate to form fructose bisphosphate. And then fructose bisphosphate splits into 2 molecules of triose phosphate. So what happens to each triose phosphate? It's dehydrogenated, which means that it lost hydrogen. So what exactly does dehydrogenation of triose phosphate cause? It leads to the formation of glycerate phosphate, release of energy, and release of hydrogen ions and electrons. So each triose phosphate formed 1 glycerate phosphate. So we have 2 glycerate phosphate. Okay? And it caused the release of energy. The release of energy caused the formation of ATP. Why? Remember when we said in this part that ATP broke down into ADP and released energy and inorganic phosphate. So it's a reversible reaction. So to form ATP, we have ADP, we have inorganic phosphate, and we used this energy that was released from dehydrogenation, okay, to form ATP. So now we formed 2 ATP in total. And the hydrogen ions that were released will be carried by NAD to form reduced NAD. So we'll have 2 reduced NAD. And now each glycerate phosphate is converted into pyruvate. And this causes the release of phosphate and energy. Okay? And they will combine together with ADP to form ATP again. And now let's see how many ATP were formed in glycolysis. So here we used 1 ATP. We used a second ATP. We formed 1 ATP, we formed a second ATP, we formed a third ATP and a fourth ATP. So we formed 4, but we used up 2, which means that the net value of ATP formed due to glycolysis is 2 ATP. But actually though, more ATP is produced due to glycolysis if we complete the cycle. So because here we formed reduced NAD, we formed 2 reduced NAD. What happens is that if you complete the cycle in the presence of oxygen, reduced NAD, each one will form 3 ATP, which means that basically we got 6 ATP due to reduced NAD and 2 ATP, which means that we got 8 ATP due to glycolysis in presence of oxygen. And that's it for glycolysis. Thank you so much for watching. I hope this helped you.